I'm so glad to have Katie on tonight. For those of you who don't know her, she is kind and welcoming and brilliant and just someone wonderful to be with. That smile that you see now, you'll see throughout the evening. But she has really wanted to bring this work that she does in schools, all across the country, and has done a lot in her homeschool, to the larger world for people who maybe haven't had a chance to work with us personally yet. So we're going to be digging into this idea of how teacher teams can personalize learning through collaborative inquiry. You can get in touch with her, Katie at the Core Collaborative. Oops. And if I learn how to click a slide, there we go. There's her beautiful headshot. And you can see some of the roles she plays. Like so many people, she does so many things. But what I think you'll benefit from most tonight is the way she interweaves those roles of being a teacher leader, a mom of kids who are school age right now, and a learner herself. Because everything she approaches, she really takes it from that vantage point of what would this be like for any of my own children, for any children I've ever worked with, and for any children I can imagine. And she also, in a leadership role, stays very much in tune with what will this feel like and be like in the classroom. And that's really going to come through with the examples she shares today. We're highlighting an amazing team with an interesting subject area that she's worked with. So we're going to have some fun with that. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to her to share our goals for tonight.
All right, well, thank you for letting me join you this evening. I'm very excited to be here. Tonight, we're going to focus on really three things. The first is just looking at collaborative inquiry and specifically how it can increase teacher agency and ownership of professional learning. We're going to learn a three-phase structure for planning that inquiry, and then we are going to look at a team's journey with collaborative inquiry, and that's a team from Lyons Township High School in LaGrange, Illinois. All right, so here we go. The first thing that I want to focus on is the goal of our work as educators. And when I think about what our ultimate goal is, we ultimately want to create empowered learners. An empowered learner is somebody that takes ownership of their learning. They regulate their own learning by asking and answering the guiding formative assessment questions. Where am I headed in my learning? Where am I now? And where to next? And an empowered learner possesses a growth mindset by embracing challenges, putting forth effort and hard work, learning from mistakes, and accepting feedback. Ultimately, they're self-efficacious. They believe in their ability to achieve.
That's so powerful. And we'd love for people to share what it means to you for someone to be an empowered learner, or any examples or questions you have about that. Because that is the heart of everything we do. And then you see those three questions she mentioned.
All right, so one of the things about empowered learners that's interesting is that in order to actually achieve in schools, you first have to feel as though you belong. And so I wanted to take a second to talk about this. As pointed out in the book, Belonging Through a Culture of Dignity by Floyd Cobb and John Cronapple, belonging precedes achievement. So if we want to cultivate empowered learners who achieve success within our educational systems, then we need to honor the dignity of each and every member of our systems. We need to accept, appreciate, validate, and treat fairly all of our learners, both students and adults. And as stated by Cobb and Cronapple, when members of our system feel as though they belong, only then can they focus on achieving their unique potential. And this goes for both students and adults.
And I know when we were talking the other night and you brought up that global intercultural piece, you said it's really all about perspective. And I couldn't resist pulling a quick quote from Belonging Through a Culture of Dignity with Floyd Cobb and John Cronapple. But they have this: looking beyond your own point of view to consider how someone else may think or feel about something improves your empathy and nurtures belonging. So it really sets that up. And then they have a quote they constructed from some other research saying that perspective taking decreases stereotypes, increases the social bond between two people, and increases altruistic motivation. And then what's so cool about their book is they take it from there and they actually give you steps for how to make that happen. But that really stuck out to me at any time. That's so important within those classroom and school communities. But it's been, I think, even more clear recently that we need that. We need to be able to see things from each other's eyes and to be able to take a step in each other's shoes. And I didn't realize that's what that meant until Katie taught me that last night.
All
So
right.
tell us why. Why should we take the time and energy that it takes to dive into an inquiry cycle?
Well, ultimately, we want to cultivate these empowered learners. And as you mentioned, perspective, that's a nice transition into the bodies of research that really kind of support this concept of cultivating these learners. In terms of students, there's two primary bodies of research that we want to turn to. The first comes from the National Association of Colleges and Employers. And through a task force of college career services and HR staffing professionals, they conducted extensive research to identify the requisite competencies that broadly prepare college graduates for successful transition into the workplace. And according to NACE, right, this organization, there are 8 competencies associated with career readiness, and those you can see on the screen in front of you. But if you explore the definitions of these competencies that have been published by NACE, you'll discover that the elements of an empowered learner in regards to both academic and social emotional learning are present. So I'm just going to touch on a few of these. But for example, when they say that they need to be critical thinkers and problem solvers, that really can be described as somebody that not only interprets and uses knowledge, facts, and data, but also demonstrates originality, inventiveness, and thinks outside of the box. When we think about, like you mentioned, right, the last one that you see there on the screen, in terms of global and intercultural fluency, that's really about talking about valuing and respecting all people and learning how to respect and work with people with different perspectives. And then if we look at teamwork and collaboration, right, really this talks about being able to work with diverse groups of people, negotiating and managing conflict, and also acknowledging your own strengths and leveraging those against a team's strengths. So all of these pieces speak to an empowered learner who can really take ownership of their own learning, self-advocate, self-regulate, and believe in their ability to achieve. The second body of research that supports this concept is John Hattie's visible learning research. I'm sure all of you have heard of it, but just to quickly provide a quick overview, right? It was originally published in 2009 and it's been updated several times since then. But John Hattie developed a way of synthesizing various influences in different meta-analysis according to their effect size. And basically, he found that the average effect size of all the factors or influences he studied was 0.4. And so he decided to judge the success of an influence on this hinge point in order to find an answer to the question, what works best in education? So according to his work, a year's worth of learning in a year's time is equal to a 0.40 effect size. So any practice or influence with a greater than 0.4 effect size has been found to increase the speed of learning. So it's in what we consider to be the zone of desired effects. So a high effect size indicates high impact on student achievement. Well, assessment capable learners or empowered learners, right, who can answer those 3 questions, where am I headed, where am I now, and where to next, they have an effect size of 1.33, right? Because they can truly self-regulate, self-advocate, and self-evaluate. So that means that students that can answer those 3 questions can more than triple the speed of their learning in a year's time. The next point in Hattie's research has to do with adults, right? So when we talk about empowered learners, we're not just talking about students, we're also talking about teams of educators. And we want empowered teams of adult learners because Hattie's research demonstrates that a group of adults that believes in their true ability to impact student learning, right, has collective efficacy. And collective efficacy can more than triple the impact on student learning as well. In fact, it's one of the highest effect sizes on the books of 1.39. So a team's belief in their ability to positively influence student learning is completely in our control and yet so impactful. So ultimately, we want to cultivate empowered learners in systems where dignity is honored and belonging is fostered. And we want this because the research demonstrates that empowered learners can triple the speed of their learning and are likely to succeed in the career force. We want this because empowered teams can cultivate collective efficacy, which can also more than triple the speed of student learning. So the question, Isaac, becomes how? How will we cultivate these empowered learners and empowered teams? And I have come to believe that the answer lies in impact teams. So right now you can see the definition of impact teams on your screen, but impact teams are teams of teachers who partner with students, right? They innovate to expand student ownership and scale out expertise to make a difference for all students.
And we'll leave that up for just a moment. In the chat, we have the question, which aspects of this definition stand out to you and why, or which speak to you? We'd love for you to share that. We haven't had any questions yet, but we had some great ideas for what it means to be an empowered learner, like that it means the learner's in the driver's seat, that empowered learners take ownership of their learning and feel they have a voice. I don't mean to leave anybody out, but that's the ones I can see on the screen right now. Partner is sticking out to Rachel, and then a different Rachel is sharing that it impacts all students, and she really did the all caps on the all. And so you can kind of think through that, but that is a powerful couple of sentences. And sometimes when we do this live, we might spend 5 minutes just thinking about this, talking about it with a partner. Carrie shared innovate is really sticking out to her. We've also got somebody highlighted student ownership. And for me, it's funny because it seems to change each time. Right now, I'm in that partner mode, right along with Paula, not Parla. Well, cool. So, yeah, expand student ownership. Awesome. Yes. So you guys can keep throwing those in there. Katie is going to take us through a bit of how. And what she's going to do is give us a very quick tour of what she might normally do in 6 hours. So if you have some questions from these next 3 or 4 slides, great. Send them to us, reach out to us after, reach out and we'll get you set up with an Impact Teams book or something. But just know she's going to go through a lot of information quickly so that we can really expand some examples of these inquiry cycles, which is really kind of the step 2, the year 2 of Impact Teams. And I still see these great thoughts coming through, like how student ownership is critical to well-structured teacher teams. So it's not only that goal, but it's got to be there from the start. And you kind of already hit this piece. I meant to take that slide out, but we've got both adults and kids working towards those goals.
Right. Okay, so if we kind of push in on that a little bit, right? The how of impact teams is really a twofold process. First, the teams come together and they ask a question, ultimately, that's aimed in increasing student ownership and agency. And then they collaborate to answer this question, but to do so, they rely on purposeful protocols, which are all grounded in 3 phases of collecting evidence of student learning, analyzing that evidence, and taking responsive action. During the first year of kind of impact team work, you learn, right, set of purposeful protocols, which encompasses about 10 different options. So then the second half of the how really has to do with the classroom and the partnership with students. Teams turn to the classroom to implement their collective actions, which ultimately comes down to deeply implementing the formative assessment process. So let's take a second to just talk about the formative assessment process. This process is comprised of 5 core practices. And it starts with the teacher team asking the question, where do we want our students headed with their learning? And to answer that question, teacher teams use learning progressions, right, which are typically derived from K-12 standards, right, that tell us where to enter the learning process and where to go next once a student has achieved particular learning goals. Then we've got the question, where are we headed in our learning in terms of the student perspective? And so we have to provide students with learning goals or learning intentions, success criteria, which is the look-fors, right, to know if they've met the learning intentions, and models, right, that show what strong work looks like and even what weak work looks like. in order for kids to be able to answer the question, where am I headed in my learning?
Mhm.
The next step in the formative assessment process is to provide evidence-based feedback. Evidence-based feedback is really grounded in that success criteria. That's what allows the feedback to be accurate and reliable. It can be provided through the teacher, but it can also be provided through self and peer assessment. Again, the key is to ground that feedback in success criteria. When students are involved in providing effective feedback, right, through self and peer assessment, they are the ones answering that question, where am I now in relationship to the learning goal? And then we get to the part where we have to provide, right, opportunities for revision and goal setting, because if the student hasn't met the learning goal yet, we need to give them opportunities to keep trying to demonstrate, right, their learning so that eventually they can show proficiency with the learning goal. And so that's where goal setting and revision comes into play. And when we have completed that cycle of learning, we turn back to the learning progression to know where to head next and which learning target to address next. So impact teams, right, come together. They really look at using this framework of the formative assessment process to ask a question, right, to guide their practice and increase student ownership of learning. Year one, questions that you see on the screen, which are a slight shift from the solution tree PLC model. They put students at the center, right, and really try to give students ownership of answering those questions, right, what skills and knowledge do I need to know, right? How will I know if I've learned the intended learning targets? What will I do if I haven't? And where do I go next? And so as teams, we look at that in terms of collecting the evidence of learning, right? So that we as the team can determine where the students are, analyzing that evidence, so we can look at the root causes, and then taking collective responsive action. All right, I've kind of gone over this, but this is just a great way to summarize, right, the first year of impact teamwork into kind of those 3 phases of evidence analysis and action.
And this is the one I was going to say, take a screenshot if you want.
All right, and then in year 2 of the impact teamwork, it kind of shifts a little bit because now the teams have done all of that foundational learning around purposeful protocols, around the formative assessment process, and now they really come together to ask that question and then to innovate, right, so that they can build capacity and build their collective expertise and answer that question to improve their practice.
And as we switch on to this next slide, we really want you to think and reflect, think back to a time in your career where you've really felt that professional learning has respected your agency as an educator and honored your dignity as an educator. So kind of be thinking of that. If you've got some ideas, share those with us and we'll refer to those in just a moment.
So one of the great parts about the collaborative inquiry process is that it does give teacher teams agency so that they can take some ownership over their professional learning and guide the direction in which they really want to direct their work as a team. Can you flip the slide for me, Isaac? Okay, great. In terms of collaborative inquiry, right? There's a constant back and forth between the team and the classroom. And that's one of the things that I always was troubled a little bit about PLC work by, was that it felt like what we did in the team meeting was focused on just the meeting. And then we kind of went back to the classroom and did our own thing. What collaborative inquiry does is really kind of puts a focus around what you are doing in the classroom and requires you to bring, right, evidence of the student learning to the meeting, talk about it, and then decide, are we on track to answering our question or are we not? And that's where you take some actions and you go back to the classroom, you try some additional practices, collect some more evidence, and come back to the meeting. So there's a constant back and forth between, right, your impact team meetings and your actual classroom practice and your partnership with students.
And here, I know we wanted to pop out for just a second and talk about this. Rachel shared that really a time that she felt they were honored as professionals and that their dignity was honored was when she worked with Paul. So shout out to Paul, who I know is watching on Facebook. We've had a few people in the chat saying hello to you and Tony. But what she really put as some evidence of that is that he adjusted to the team as support, and that he really listened. He listened to their needs and worked to meet them. And maybe you could speak a bit to how the team does that as a unit.
How the team comes together to.
Yeah, and how they listen to each other and how they work to meet their own needs when you don't have the support of a Paul. Maybe you've moved on in your third or fourth year, you know.
Yeah, so the idea behind the impact teamwork, right, is that you're really developing some foundational protocols and practices of how to work together efficiently and keep your focus on student learning. But like we talked about belonging, one of the things that we really want to do too and interweave into our practices is to try to develop trust amongst the team, connectedness, right, and to look at some of the structures and practices that are in place that will actually allow us to effectively work together as a team.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because that's really coming up in these anecdotes that are being shared from a coach, Missy. She's saying, you know, she really asked for feedback, and they kind of discussed at the end, and that her teachers shared they felt they were being treated as professionals because they were part of the knowledge creation instead of just being given that information. And that's something that's so cool and invigorating and sometimes terrifying about collaborative inquiry, is you're inquiring into things where the answer may be out there, but we don't know it yet. It's not as simple as, here, I'll come tell you. And then there's a connection here from Paula, really talking about a successful ed camp she participated in. So they had, you know, these 40-minute sessions where they had the choice between sessions. And it sounds like there was some shared leadership in that. So the leadership was expanded out amongst the professionals, and then people got to choose what they needed. So instead of that one size fits all, they could determine, I have this need, I'm going to ask for this. And I know I've had situations as a participant and as a leader where there's been more of a clear focus on honoring that dignity. I know it's something I still work on, is to make sure that we're here together. Well, thank you, those of you who are sharing. And now I'm going to hand it back over to Katie, who's going to get into the nitty gritty of how, and then we're going to watch some great teachers talk through their examples.
All right, so the collaborative inquiry three-phase structure that we said we would go through in our goals comes down to three pieces of ideating, designing, and envisioning. And we use a blueprint, an impact team inquiry blueprint to guide us through this process of really choosing a question and then designing how we're going to answer the question. So if you could flip the screen for me real quick.
You got it.
Great. It ultimately starts with a question, right? So the first thing the team has to do is decide what exactly do they want to pursue. And there are a bunch of different things that you could use to determine a focus for your question. You could, right, look at interests, right, your team's interests regarding pedagogy, a practice maybe you haven't used before in the classroom that you would like to pursue. You could look at deficiencies maybe you've observed in your students, things that you wish, skills you wish they may have possessed when they come into the room for you. You could also, you know, maybe look at school-wide areas of focus that you might want to pursue. So there's a lot of different things that you could turn to come up with a focus for your inquiry question.
And what I'm hearing is you're casting a wider net than here's our assessment data that we maybe get from the state or the district or even from my class. So why is that we have all these options?
Sure. So the goal is really to give the teacher team agency over their professional learning. And we want the team to invest in the question. A lot of times when inquiry kind of goes awry, it's because ultimately at the end of the day, the team didn't really want to answer the question. They didn't really believe in the value of the focus that they chose. So if we kind of pinpoint that into something that's driven by you know, state assessment scores, and that's not truly what the team wants, we're not going to see the level of agency that we really want to give to the team evolve.
Thank you.
Sure. So At the district where I'm from, Lyons Township High School District, we have two rules to our inquiry questions. So, you know, being a former social studies teacher, I know nothing positive comes of anarchy, but we also want to give some teams autonomy. So we put a little structure into place. So the first part of the structure is that you have to read the question in the formative assessment process. And the second half of the structure is that the question needs to be aimed at increasing student ownership of learning. You could flip to the next screen. We'll take some look at some examples. Thank you. So if we were looking at those 5 core practices that we talked about earlier in regards to the formative assessment process, you could ask a pretty straightforward question, like, how can we use discussion to increase student ownership of learning in biology? Or how can we use peer assessment to increase student ownership of learning in physical education? But there are many aspects and layers to the formative assessment process, many things that lie underneath those core practices. So as teams get a little more elevated in this process and used to how inquiry works, we often see some other questions evolve, some different layers. Some examples might be, how can we use metacognitive reading strategies to increase student ownership of reading? So here you see metacognition is a little bit deeper in regards to where it fits with the formative assessment process. But also, right, the focus here is it's still on student ownership, but it's specifically on student ownership of reading. This next question here, I worked with a team that was really focused on social emotional learning. So they wanted to, right, again, change the ownership piece to be about social emotional learning. It was a really awesome inquiry to see unfold.
Sorry, we got a little bit of a delay between my click and when it shows up, I think.
Very good. All right, so in terms of the 3-phase structure, it starts with the ideate stage. And this is where you choose your question and you kind of walk through the stems that are on inquiry template. What we're about to do is watch a team and kind of their experience, and they're going to walk us through how they came about choosing their question. This team is near and dear to my heart. They are 3 very amazing educators at Lyons Township High School, and they are from the SCUBA team. So if a team in the water can be this innovative, anybody can be this innovative. So let's go ahead and see what they came up with.
And I just want to say, this is so powerful to have these examples, because even as an impact team coach, I was a little bit unsure of how this process would really energize us and take us to where we needed to be until I got to work through it. Because I had been in kind of smaller versions of this process. So I think it's a real gift to be able to hear teachers who've experienced it. Da, na, 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 na. We promise this works. We practiced it like 12 times and it worked perfectly every time. There we go. Okay.
Our inquiry was how to implement peer assessment to improve student ownership of their learning.
When we go through our SCUBA skill practice, we find that we typically run short on time. And as we go through that skill practice, if we're following the PADI model, we're typically demonstrating a skill and then having one student do it. And as we talked as a PLC group, we thought that it was going to be, there was an opportunity to enhance the practice and enhance our opportunity for feedback to students.
All right, so you can see that the SCUBA team, right, chose to focus on peer assessment, ultimately because they found that they didn't have as much time as they needed in the course of the classroom to provide effective feedback to all of their students. And they had the added pressure of trying to get the students ready for their deep dive certification and their skills tests. So this would be super beneficial to them if they could really get the kids to internalize, right, the skills that are needed, what they look like, and then actually provide each other effective feedback. So we walk through this form. Ultimately, the form asks you to look at what kind of expertise lies in your team already, what you need to learn to answer your question. And again, the question here is, how can we use peer assessment to increase student ownership of learning in SCUBA. And then it also talks about how you're going to share your learning at the end. And for this particular case, we were able to, as a school, right, benefit and grow as a culture of learning because the SCUBA team shared their work along with several other teams in kind of a science fair manner. So the second part of the three-phase structure is design. And the design stage requires a team to really look at what standards are associated with the work that they are going to focus on to determine if they are improving student learning, student practice, the particular practice that they're targeting, and student ownership of learning. Associated with this is looking at different sources of evidence. We really want to triangulate data in regards to collaborative inquiry. So we're not just trying to look at summative assessment data, right, or do an autopsy. We're trying to look at multiple pieces to develop the whole picture around what's going on in regards to teaching and learning. So we might look at student work, which in this case could be, right, the student dives themselves. We might look at student voice, which often takes the form of focus groups, interviews, or surveys, could even be a reflection form. Another form of evidence might be observation. You could observe the teachers doing particular practices. You could also observe the students. And in this case, you could do your observation of the actual peer feedback being delivered in process. And another source of evidence then is teacher perception data. And that can come in the form of interviews, surveys, reflection forms, focus groups as well. So the goal is for teams to pick at least 3 sources of evidence. And so the SCUBA team is about to tell you what they chose.
Woohoo, that one decided to work right on time that time.
We looked at student perception data. We gave students a survey to find out if they felt like going through this process was helpful for them. We looked at just their own performance. Were their skills improved throughout this process? And then finally, we looked at our teaching methods, the way that we were instructing kids to be able to give effective feedback, and what areas we could use to enhance that process.
And I'm wondering, as Katie continues to share this, what questions have you guys really searched into, looked into, worked on together, and then what evidence have you collected? So you can share that in the chat or on Facebook Live, and we just would love to have that for our information and maybe to respond to. And of course, any questions or celebrations you have. And now the next step.
All right, so after they chose their 3 sources of evidence, well, we also kind of tried to zero in on what specifically were we going to be looking at. And in this particular case, they were really focused on these skills, right, that are associated with diving, and the 5 big skills that students struggled with in the past and are really essential to success in their discipline. And then you'll hear a little bit more about that in the next segment of the video. Then we also tried to pinpoint which products we would see that in. So the team was focused on looking at the dives themselves, because the theory was that if students were increasing, right, ownership, then they would take the feedback that they were getting in peer assessment and work to apply it to their dives and improve their dives. The second thing that we were looking at, because we ultimately wanted to get better at peer assessment and peer feedback, was the actual quality of the peer feedback itself, but also how it was modeled and delivered by the teachers. So now let's hear a little bit more from
Awesome. And Paula just shared something that I think we're all thinking. If the SCUBA teacher team can do this, it's got to work in anything. Because who has a more unique position than the SCUBA teachers?
They definitely have some more challenges.
So when we approached this collaborative inquiry, we had to unpack the success criteria for the 5 major components. So we really looked at what are the main skills that students struggle with on a regular basis. Once we identified those 5, then we started to look at what were the key pieces, what was that success criteria that we had to identify for one another and clarify for one another, and how do we provide prompts for effective feedback that students could utilize in that process. So after we completed our success criteria and identified what that success criteria was for those 5 skills, then we looked at how do we get kids to actually give that effective feedback.
We decided on a glow and grow method in which when our students come up to give peer feedback, they are giving a positive first, and that's our glow, and then they are being very specific in their constructive feedback of what needs to change, and that's our grow.
So we created skill cards that had the lists of steps for students to make it very clear what they were going to do, as well as effective feedback components that was on the backside of those SCUBA skill cards. Once we had done that, we practiced in the classroom on how to give effective feedback around a specific skill and how to utilize the cards. When we transitioned into the pool, we went through a progression that students had to follow, where we initially had them perform a skill and then stand up and verbalize their feedback. And they could use the cards or not to be able to give that effective feedback. Through continuous repetition, we slowly started to take away their opportunity to stand up and actually talk, and start to utilize the cards underwater by pointing and giving different pieces of hand signals to give that feedback. And then eventually, we were able to transition to a point where we were not utilizing the skill cards, and students were able to give effective feedback primarily using hand signals while staying underwater.
And we're getting a lot of comments about just how interesting it is to see it work in this way. And as Paul and some others said, it takes away any excuse I have if I'm teaching math or science or social studies or reading or writing today. If they can do it underwater without oxygen, then certainly I can do it in my class.
Well, they do have a tank.
Yeah, true, yeah.
All right, well, a few things to point out, right, is that's super cool. And the SCUBA team, you could see how their inquiry started to unfold, right? First, they chose a peer assessment structure, the Glow and Grow, which you heard Susie tell you about. And they applied that after unpacking the skills that they focused on. There were 5, and really being clear about the success criteria. Where the innovation truly came into play was really about developing the skill cards for students and the sentence stems. What was really funny and something that I would never have thought of was when we first, they first took them to the pool and we were watching, right? Those skill cards floated away, because if you're going to use them in the water, then you have to weight them and laminate them. So these are things that, right, where the innovation comes into play in all of this. Additionally, right, after you have kind of the framework of your inquiry and what you're going to do to answer your question, you find the need to apply certain protocols, and you find that they really fit when you start looking at student work, evidence of the learning, and then analysis and taking responsive actions. So in that first year of the impact team work, we studied 10 purposeful protocols, and then we start to apply them where they fit during the collaborative inquiry process. If you could switch the screen for me, we might have that delay.
You got it, yep.
Thanks. All right, so here you will see the SCUBA team tell you which protocols they applied.
We used both micro-teaching protocol and the lesson study protocol.
So we used a lesson study primarily. That was a big one for us, where we went in and we collaborated to develop a lesson, to actually 2 separate lessons, one in the classroom and then one again in the pool, that all centered around trying to give and teach students how to give effective peer feedback. And then when we went through the actual process in the pool, we went through and one of us taught the lesson while the other ones were observing and collecting data. We had an opportunity to debrief after that and make adjustments accordingly, and we did that for all 3 of our teachers, ultimately finding that we were all strong in certain areas, but by going through, we thought we were very consistent, with what we were doing. However, I think we found that there were certain aspects of the way that we presented a lesson that if we could combine all three approaches, that we were going to be more effective that way.
I love hearing how those protocols can work in something that I've never personally done. Just so exciting to me. Like I see Missy and some others shared things about like writing that I've gotten to be a part of, but that's just so cool to me.
Yeah, so the one other protocol that they applied was the unpacking, and that really came into play first when they really looked at the skills, and they had to be super clear with themselves about what success looked like with performing those skills in the pool. And the purpose of unpacking is really so that you can get to analyzing student work and to be on the same page in terms of understanding your expectations. But then they applied what they talked about was the micro teaching and lesson study protocol. And the purpose of those protocols are really to enhance your pedagogical practices in the classroom and look at how you can effectively implement peer assessment. And this group did such an awesome job with that. And as Kurt just told you in the video, they definitely saw that they had some differences in regards to their clarity with explaining the peer assessment process in the first place, how much modeling they gave, and all of those slight variations actually ended up benefiting them to learn from, and all of them improved as a result. If we look at that final stage of the three-phase process, it's envisioning success. So one of the things that we really want to take time to do is answer that question. If we were successful with getting students to take ownership of their learning through the use of peer assessment, what would that look like? Specifically, what will we hear students say? What will you see them do? How would they feel? And what would they be thinking? And so the team takes time before they ever engage in this to kind of spell out what success looks like. And not only do we look at just that question in regards to the students, but then we turn and we look at that in regards to the team itself. So we answer the question, if the team is really successful and are in fact cultivating collective efficacy, right? Believing their ability to impact student learning through peer assessment. What are they thinking? What are they feeling? What are they saying? And what are they doing? And so this ultimately, this process kind of becomes the success criteria for the collaborative inquiry that you can then go back and refer to over and over to see if you are making progress.
Awesome. And as we watch this next piece, be thinking a little bit about, what does it mean to be an empowered learner for students, for educators, for all of us? What does that mean? We'd love for you to share some of those thoughts with us. And we're going to hear one more time from this amazing team.
Looking at the student perception data, it was very clear that students felt like it was something that was overwhelmingly positive to their growth and their development as scuba divers. I think that we saw that as well in our observations, and when we assessed students at the end of the course, as well as when they actually went to get certified in their dives, they felt very comfortable doing the skills. And we're able to meet the standards effectively. Every time we met, we knew what the overarching goal was. So it was never a question of, what do we do now? It was always, okay, we've done this. This is the logical next step. This is the progression that we need to take if we're going to answer this question. And that was my first opportunity, really working in a PLC where we didn't have to occasionally say, what do we do next? So being in a different role, I know that it was challenging going through it last year, but again, having that experience going through it builds my level of confidence in terms of expanding it across our division. I certainly see the value in doing it. As I had said, it was the first time that we didn't have to come into a PLC meeting and say, what are we doing next? So having that centralized focus for teachers to be able to center around and collectively kind of work towards that common goal to answer that question, I think there's a tremendous amount of value in that. And it's something that, if it's done well and it's done right, you know, could have a great impact across the division for all of our teachers and all of our students.
Mic drop. I love how that wraps up. And I know we got another slide or two to show you here in a minute, but we wanted to pop out and just have a moment to discuss. So we've had the chat you've probably seen blinking on your screen has been going a little crazy in a good way, but we'd love to hear from more of you what you're thinking and reflecting now it means to be an empowered learner, as well as any thoughts, examples, questions, feedback you might have. A couple of things I wanted to share out were just, you know, we heard really that they're seeing this connection to clarity, especially when we envision success, that now we know exactly what it means to be successful. It feels like this, it sounds like this, it looks like this. And then along, you know, with those ideas, Paul really brought attention to the fact that when you do that, we ensure that we have a focus on quality and that we can look back and measure that quality. Did we make these things happen that we thought we could? And halfway through, how can we change tracks? Yeah, clarity is key for standards, task, and inquiry. Got to have clarity for the process and for everything. And then, of course, for leadership, we really need to do it. We really need to have that clarity. And Paul added a question, but then also a possible answer for it. How do leaders support inquiry? Pretty simple. Just ask your teams how you can support them. And I think that's so interesting that that little line hits so much on how Katie started us off, thinking about belonging and dignity and agency and honoring these things as professionals. And literally, as I'm reminding people about you saying that, that's what Paul's typing. I love you guys are on the same wavelength. And Paula shared with us, you know, that, yeah, Paul said you guys are clones. I agree in a good way, but you're prettier. But that a good demonstration of what good looks like will help empower students, another tie to clarity. And then also for empowered learners, they know what they need to do to get where they want to be. So it's so interesting how these pieces, you know, are inseparable. We can't talk about one without the other. So what are you thinking right now, Katie? You've only been talking for 45 minutes straight.
Well, I think that I would be remiss if I didn't mention this team, because one of the things that they did very well was rely on each other. And they did totally believe in their ability to impact student learning. They worked super hard around answering that question, how can we use peer assessment to improve student learning? And it's not anything that they ever had done before. So when we take a look at that concept that we talked about at the onset of belonging preceding achievement, I definitely think this is a team where they truly did appreciate each other, validate each other, treat each other fairly, and accept all of the
It just froze up on me for a minute. I'm not sure if it's just Katie or just me or both of us, but hopefully you can still hear me or that you can hear her. And okay, good. Paul can hear me. So I think she froze for just a moment. That happens sometimes. But I'd like to say what this really has me thinking of, I'm seeing these comments about pride, and there's a line that I can't quote because I won't remember it just right. But from a song that says, I want to have the kind of pride my mother had, not the kind that the Bible says is bad, or something like that. But I love that idea of having pride in our work, because you can feel that passion coming through. And you know that there's kids can feel it, you know, and so how powerful is that when we tie all these things together and think that if students are proud of what they're doing and they have that ownership, how far will they go? How deep will they go? If teachers have that same ownership and pride, how far will they take it? Because we know that motivation is what drives us. And we've seen, my wife is a third grade teacher. She's doing a great job teaching virtually. and she's dealing with the same technical issues that we're having right now and that everybody deals with. But it's been so interesting because even when she's had those moments where she's like, nothing worked and all this, no matter how prepared she was, she still made those connections to the kids and, you know, made it clear to them she loves them. She's excited to be here. She's been getting ready for them, you know, for so long. And I think this idea of collaborative inquiry builds that more than anything I've seen. And I have to say, it's helped me reflect as someone who is often in the role of coach and consultant to make sure that I don't let that bad kind of pride ever take over for me and want to just lead the way, but that I can lead as a servant and be a part of that team. Just as Paul said, what do you do to lead? You ask the teams what support they need. Katie is the perfect example of perseverance. She was frantically texting, I know, trying to get back on, but that happens sometimes. And Paul really hit something that I think is a great way to kind of summarize this piece of the discussion, talking about empowered learners, talking about teachers who are in a profession that is often treated without dignity from people outside, but unfortunately even from people inside. But he made this comment, you don't need a test score or a grade to know you made an impact. The kids can articulate the process. And that is so true. If a child can talk about those 3 questions that Katie hit with us a couple times, where am I in my learning? Where am I going? And you know, how am I going? What am I doing to get there next? Oh, and I misspoke. It's progress, not process, sorry. But if they can talk about their progress in the formative assessment process, we know so much more about their learning than any score or grade can tell us. And then I would argue the same thing's true for us as educators. If you can say, okay, Isaac, and Paul does this with me often, and Katie and I do it when we're talking about impact teams. Hey, what's going well? What are you struggling with? What do you need? What do you wonder? Well, you know, what did not go well? And if I can talk about that, you know, I'm really ready to learn. And so, Katie, I know you froze up for a second. Is there anything you want to say before we click to that empowered slide?
I'm not exactly sure where I got kicked off, but,
Yeah.
but no.
And as we look at this, Paul made a good point. You know, now that we're in this largely virtual world, it's funny because I was going to say nervous, but we were terrified in March about what might happen to learning. Because I think the quickest, easiest thing to do, and Lori, who we work with a lot, said she saw evidence of this early on, is to go to the most basic teaching. Practice this, do it, turn it in, we'll give it a grade, and then you'll do the next sheet. And some of that happened, but the first couple of weeks, that's okay. We just had to survive. But we found that we can gather that perception data almost in a simpler fashion now, that we can use surveys. We can get kids to drag and drop a response. We can get them to color code something, or just get on this and thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs in the middle. But that really when we get them to do a quick video or a survey, they can share where they are in that learning and how they feel about it, what support they need. And if you want to know more about that, please check out www.clarityforlearning, the digit 4.com, but that's clarityforlearning.com. If you put in anything close to that, it'll pop up for you. But Katie, I know you wanted to wrap up a bit on this slide.
I did. So I think in sum, right, it all comes back to the concept of empowered learners, right? We're trying to cultivate them in both of our students and our adults. And they're really created by teams of educators that innovate to increase student ownership. And when we're talking about collaborative inquiry, right, there's no better time than to engage in this right now, because there's questions all around us when we're trying to take what we used to know in terms of traditional classroom teaching and put it into a virtual environment, whether that be hybrid or fully remote. A perfect question in this kind of context would be, how can we use teacher clarity to increase student ownership of learning? Or how can we use peer assessment in the virtual world to increase student ownership of learning? So I hope you all consider inquiry as a way to move forward, and have a lovely evening. Thank you for
Yes.
having me, Isaac.
Thank you all so much for joining us. And we want to share a few more opportunities to keep connected and to connect with us. I say this every time, and I'm sure people who are on these often are tired of it, but we are the core collaborative. So you need to collaborate. You can grab a screenshot of this, or just with your phone right now, grab that and it'll give you a link to all of our social media. And as you've seen Katie do now, we want to highlight the work you're doing. None of this happens without children and adults in schools every day doing great work. Not only would we love you to join us on Core Chat, but if you're interested, we'd love for you to moderate. And Katie, I hope you're watching the chat notes as people are thanking you, as they should be, for amazing insight and just being so inviting. Love this idea of choose your own PD adventure. This is one way that we feel we can honor your dignity, is to provide you agency in your learning. These are all free ways you can jump on and learn from our learning network. Find out more about that at thecorecontributes.com. Next month, we have the amazing Rachel, who is on here with us, I know watching right now, digging into impact with English learners. This is always critical, but I think it's been even more obvious how important it is as we've moved to blended and virtual learning. We've seen some significant inequities. I did see that Core Collab is always a love fest, and it is. We love what we do, and we love the people we have the privilege to do it with. You can see our Core Chat calendar coming up. You can always find that at thecorecontributes.com and on Twitter. Really want to give a shout out to two amazing authors and thought leaders, Floyd Cobb and John Crownapple, the authors of Belonging Through Dignity. And right now, John Crownapple is being featured in our author series, The Authored and Inspired. So please check out that video. It's awesome. And Donnie's been doing some great work on that. And then, of course, this is our first time doing this. So I'm going to slow down for just a moment to say, no matter what you have going on, join us for this National Book Study. We say too often that things are life-changing. This idea of understanding what it means to belong and what it means to honor or to harm our own dignity and the dignity of others is truly life-changing. And as we all know from watching the news and living our lives, there is a clear need historically and right now for us to do that. And as Katie started us off talking about dignity and perspective, I promise you, you'll walk away from each of these sessions feeling that you'll just feel that your life is richer. And they will not be broadcast like this. They'll be in close. We can be honest and open as we take this journey, but you can see 7 p.m. Eastern, Wednesdays. Check out that bit.ly and you can join. We're sending out information about that frequently and would love to have you. Something else we're pumped about, you saw Paul, he can't fly to Scotland right now, but that's not stopping him. So he's going to be a part of this blether, which does not have the negative connotation of blather in Scotland. But he's going to be featured on September 24th at 1600 Scotland time, which I'm pretty sure is 1 Eastern. But that's going to be awesome. Is that right, Katie? Okay, I thought you were maybe correcting me because I had some issues with time zones earlier. Yeah, 5 hours ahead of our time. Yeah, so if you go 5 hours back, it'll be 1 Eastern, and then you can go to your time zone from that. But this is going to be great, and it's just another reminder that we are all one people and that education is for all. With that in mind, we've got this offering. You can join us online at your own pace and take one of these self-paced courses. Great offerings. You can see those there and find out more at the Core Collaborative Virtual PD. And of course, as Katie alluded to a bit, our focus has shifted over the last few months, and we've really dug in deeply under the leadership of Paul and Kara and Lori and some others to what does it mean to learn deeply and with honor in the virtual world. And we've built it off of these 4 building blocks. Yeah, Paula just said she can hear her beloved bagpipes now. I grew up with a father who's a bagpiper. So we had neighbors who either loved us or hated us and nothing in between. But what a great line to leave on, a line from a student. And this was not, this wasn't pulled out of him. This is just something he said on the fly. But when success criteria came into my life, I was so much better. I was so shocked at how it helped me. That is one of the many kinds of things you can see if you join us on YouTube for models of success. Katie, any word of closing before we let everyone eat dinner or go to bed or whatever it might be?
Thank you for your participation. It was an honor to be here tonight and to talk about collaborative inquiry and the SCUBA team's journey. Thank you so much.
Yes, yes. Thank you all for your time and attention. And as Paula or someone said, we do love you and we're glad you're here with us. We'll see you next time.
Bye.